Andy Ruiz has made some interesting comments in the run up to his fight against Luis Ortiz, which will be taking place on September 4th. So if we scroll down here, you'll see that he said, "The main focus has just been training my skills. This isn't a weightlifting contest, so I've been getting back to what originally made me a champion. I'm not here to lose weight or look the part. I just want to be the part. I've been doing this all my life. I've been fighting since I was 6 years old, so the muscle memory is there. I needed this long training camp for this type of fight. That's going to help me get comfortable in this fight. I think this is a similar fight for me to the Anthony Joshua fight. It's just that he's a lefty. We have a great team and we're working hard. September 4th is going to be a hell of a fight." Now, when I hear Andy Ruiz say this, I am somewhat disappointed because I think he has a tremendous amount of potential if he could get his weight down to something reasonable. I'm not expecting him to be a chiseled Adonis, but if he was to get down to, let's say, the 230s, which is a very reasonable weight for a guy who's 6 foot tall, 6'1", if he could get down to that and maintain that weight, I think he would be a lot more effective as a pressure fighter. And he would have, the ability to switch it up when need be, get on his toes, as we saw in the Chris Arreola fight, and actually box a little bit. That's a dimension of his game which wasn't available to him when he was in the 260s, 270s. And it's not just losing the weight, of course, but he did a lot of work on strengthening his legs when he was training for the Chris Arreola fight. I mean, we all saw those pictures of the extra muscle he put on his legs. So for him to then turn around and say, "I'm going to go back to what I used to do," that is, as far as I'm concerned, a worrying sign that he could be relapsing. You see, Ruiz was somewhat effective. Obviously, he managed to beat Anthony Joshua, but not before getting dropped himself, not before getting hit with lots of clean punches in the run up to that left hook that dropped him in the third round against AJ first time out. If he was lighter, if he had less weight around his waist, he'd be able to move his head more. He'd have faster feet. He'd be able to cut off the ring more quickly. There's so much potential there with Ruiz, athletic potential, but it requires discipline. Now, when somebody is lacking in discipline naturally, they will look for excuses to abandon mission once they start becoming more disciplined, because it's very hard for them to stick to that particular path. And in the Chris Arreola fight, Andy Ruiz was dropped and he was hurt noticeably several times. So, of course, he's going to look at that and say, "Oh, well, I wasn't as strong as I normally would be. And there you go. This proves that all this weight loss is a waste of time." It just gives him the excuse to go back to doing what he was doing before, which is clearly overeating. Well, and there were many boxing fans, by the way, who have been facilitating Andy Ruiz relapsing, have been encouraging him to relapse. "Oh yeah, you need to put the weight back on. You were better with it." This is very primitive thinking. When Tyson Fury first came back to boxing after his hiatus, he was very weak. He was weak in the Sefer Safiri fight, although you couldn't see it as easily there. He was weak in the next fight he had against Pianeta. He was weak in the first Deontay Wilder fight. But that's because he'd lost an enormous amount of weight. And losing that amount of weight can weaken you. It depends on the individual, but for most people, it is going to weaken you. And it's going to take time for you to regain your strength at the lower weight. Yeah. And that has been the case with Tyson Fury. He was well over 300 pounds, whatever he weighed, nearly 400 pounds. And now he's like, whatever, 60, 70, 80 pounds lighter than that. Even in his recent fights against Deontay Wilder, he's much lighter than he was when he was at the peak of his weight, whatever it was, close to 400 pounds. So it's taken him a while to get that strength back. It hasn't happened overnight. And there are lots of examples. Riddick Bowe, when he fought Andrew Galotta in the rematch, he was clearly weakened from all the weight that he'd lost. He got down to a similar weight that he was against Evander Holyfield when they fought the first time several years earlier. But again, because he hadn't been at that weight for so long and he'd lost the weight really quickly, he depleted himself. He'd put most of his energy in camp into losing weight rather than going into camp to prepare by way of strategy and so on and so forth. So much of his energy went into losing weight. Now with Andy Ruiz, yeah, maybe that was the case in the Chris Arreola fight. Maybe he was depleted from losing weight. But when you maintain that weight and when you continue to bring it down gradually, your strength will come. Because remember, we're not talking about Andy Ruiz losing muscle here. We're talking about him losing body fat. Okay, that's it. And I'm not expecting Andy Ruiz to get down to 220 or whatever the case may be anytime soon. But at least I would expect him to maintain the weight he had last time against Arreola or bring it down slightly. Maybe 5 pounds less than when he fought Arreola. But because he hasn't had to spend a whole training camp getting down to that weight again, he's going to be able to concentrate more on developing the skills and just maintaining that kind of weight. You see what I'm saying? So he shouldn't be as depleted. Anyway, the bottom line is, I find what Ruiz saying to be concerning. Then again, it could be a red herring. Maybe he's trying to throw Luis Ortiz off. We'll have to wait and see what weight Ruiz comes in at the weigh-in. I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised. I'm hoping he's no heavier than he was against Arreola, and if not, a bit lighter. But that's not what I'm expecting. I'm expecting him to come in the same old weight that he used to weigh. Let's say in the first AJ fight where he weighed, I think, nearly 260. And for me, that's too heavy for the guy. As I've mentioned many times before, the weight around his waist actually prevents him from bending at the waist. It removes a lot of the flexibility in the waist when you're carrying that much fat there. And so the Andy Ruiz who fought AJ was very hittable. Are we going to go back to that version of Andy Ruiz, a hittable guy? That's not going to help him. I think against someone like Luis Ortiz, who's an old man, much older than Andy Ruiz, you want to fight a young man's fight. And a young man's fight includes moving your feet. Whether it's moving your feet quickly to get in close or moving your feet laterally to make it awkward for Ortiz to land his own shots. Having the ability to be versatile. These are the important things as far as I'm concerned against an old man. If you are standing straight up, plodding forward against Luis Ortiz, that's an absolute godsend for him. He wants a stationary, slow-footed guy in front of him who stands straight up and doesn't move his head, because that lines up perfectly for his left hand, even at his age, right? You're walking into all his traps if that's what you're going to be doing. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what weight he comes in at. But for me personally, I'm kind of disappointed and concerned when I hear him say the things that he's saying here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And I know many of you have said that I shouldn't be putting all these hopes on Andy Ruiz because it's obvious from his track record that he can't remain disciplined. I get that. But, I'm an insufferable optimist. I always like to, at least when it comes to boxing, I'm an insufferable optimist. I always like to see the glass as half full rather than half empty. I always like to be positive and what have you. And I'm well aware that maybe I'm wishful thinking with Andy Ruiz, We'll see what happens. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.